Hello everybody and welcome to The Discriminating Gamer. You know, a friend of mine recently told me that yoga is the best thing that you can do for your body. I think it's a bit of a stretch. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to go ahead and take a look at my top 10 books that need a board game. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, so my top 10 books that need a game. A couple of things I want to talk about before I get into the list. First of all, these are all novels, okay? So no nonfiction here. These are all novels. And second of all, some of them are a specific title, and some of them are series, right? Larger series of books. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to jump into it. Number 10 is a book that I read a few years back, and it's part of a series. I probably just want to focus here on the first book, however. And I actually just learned they're just like after 4 or 5 years, he's writing the fifth book in the series, or the fourth book in the series rather. But this is one of the scariest books I ever read. 1 Second After by William Forstchen. 1 Second After by William Forstchen. 1 Second After is a book about an EMP attack on America. It's about a small community in North Carolina. The protagonist is a military historian, so I can identify. Anyway, so it's about this professor. He'd been in the Army, and he essentially has to get this community together as the country just goes to crap. And you start to have roving gangs of cannibals and all sorts of things that he has to fight off. He essentially has to fortify this town and this community, and it's an absolutely brilliant book. But it's a hard book to read at times. It's a sad book, but it's very good. And I think maybe you could create kind of a good, almost a States of Siege kind of game here, where you've got different armies and whatnot trying to approach you and take out the city, while at the same time you're scrambling for resources. Or maybe some kind of a cooperative game that had those kinds of mechanics in it as well. But that is 1 Second After. That's by William Forstchen, and that is my number 10. My number 9 is a book series. And this is one of my favorite book series. And to my knowledge, there's no board game based on it. And this is Bernard Cornwell's Richard Sharpe series. This series deals with a rifleman in the Napoleonic Wars, and this rifleman has all sorts of adventures and all sorts of he's almost acts like a commando at sometimes in this book. He's almost kind of the British nuclear bomb. He can figure everything out and foil the French, and it's just great fun. They're just great fun. And he took a big break from writing these novels. He wrote one last year, finally, after several years, and he's got one coming out here before too long again. So I think the Richard Sharpe novels will be fun. And here I could imagine almost something like almost a dungeon crawler, where you send Sharpe and his men and allies into various kind of dungeons, for lack of a better word, but situations where they have to fulfill specific missions based on the books, and they have to get in, do what they have to do, and get out, maybe escort people to protect them, or take out a particular person, military figure. I think there's a lot of stuff you could do here, and I really appreciate it. But I could totally see kind of a dungeon crawler, some creative card mechanics there. Really be a lot of fun. So that is my number 9. That is the Richard Sharpe series by Bernard Cornwell. My number 8 is probably, it may be one of my favorite book series I've ever read. For a long time, it was my favorite, and I think there's another series here that kind of eclipses it as we go on here. But this is also, too, set in the Napoleonic Wars, and this is C.S. Forster's Horatio Hornblower. Now, this sounds to me, this has been around for the 60s, so it sounds to me like maybe there could be already one out there. But this would be a great game of Napoleonic naval warfare. I could see, again, it'd be somewhat mission-based, based on the books and different things you had to do. But again, also, too, I could see some kind of maybe deck-building element in there, gaining certain skills and whatnot. But maybe even taking a completely different tack. A lot of times he would have to deal with other personalities on the same ship he was on. So I don't know, maybe kind of some political maneuvering on a ship might be a fun way to go with that. But anyway, that is my number 8. That is the Horatio Hornblower series from C.S. Forster. My number 7, you knew he'd be on this list sooner or later. This is a Stephen King book, and this is The Stand. And The Stand, of course, you know, the book The Stand is loosely based on the Lord of the Rings, so you can almost see kind of a War of the Ring or Star Wars Rebellion type game here, where one side represents kind of the forces of good living in Boulder, Colorado, and then the other side would be, you know, Randall Flagg's people in Las Vegas. And maybe it could evolve into a war game, but it wouldn't necessarily be a war game. You kind of send spies to each other's territory to learn what they're doing and what they're up to. There could be specific objectives that each of them are trying to gather. But I kind of see it as kind of that, maybe that that sort of worker placement element from Star Wars Rebellion, sending people to different areas to do things and to find out things. I think that could be a lot of fun. And then again, maybe you could have kind of a war game element to it, like War of the Ring and like Star Wars Rebellion. So I think that'd be pretty fun. Now, as kind of an aside here, I kind of struggled between, did I want The Stand or did I want Salem's Lot? Because Salem's Lot was another great Stephen King game, and I kind of saw that as, you know, cooperative game where you've got to find out what Barlow's up to before the whole town turns into vampires. Again, I thought that'd be another great one. But I went with The Stand. It's a little more epic game, a little bit bigger game. So that is number 7. That's The Stand by Stephen King. My number 6 is another horror novel. This is a series of horror novels. And again, it's one I don't think I've seen a board game at all about this, and I could be wrong. But this is Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles with Lestat and Louis, etc., Armand. And essentially, I could see this game as being a deck builder where you're trying to gain influence among the vampires, but maybe you're also at times trying to attack other vampires. And there's, of course, penalties from creating new vampires or killing vampires. So I think there's a lot of fun you could have there. And you could have, you know, bring in like the Talamasca, which is kind of this human organization that watches the vampires. I think there's a lot of fun things you could do within that universe, and I think the artwork you could come up with it would just be insane and a lot of fun. So that is number 6. That is The Vampire Chronicles from Anne Rice. We'll get back to the review in just a moment. I want to take a minute to ask you to check out my other channel, that is Cody Carlson, PhD, where we talk about history, books on history, military history. I even post some of my lectures for my classes on there. Please check that out. Please subscribe to that channel. And now, back to the review. My number 5 is, again, this is probably, if not Horatio Hornblower, then this is probably my favorite book series of all time. For this list, however, it's about halfway up the series because I kind of struggle to think about what kind of a game it would be. But this is George MacDonald Fraser's Flashman series. Now, if you've not read the Flashman series, they're hilarious. They're about a 19th century British officer who is a gambler, a womanizer, a thief, a drunk, just all of these negative attributes. But just through sheer luck, he always comes up smelling like roses. It's an incredibly funny series of books, but there's some real good history here. And he is everywhere. You know, he's fighting in Afghanistan. He goes to China. He's actually with John Brown when he raids Harper's Ferry. He's all over the place, and it's always just tremendous, tremendous fun, every one of these books. So here, again, I almost think this would have to be some kind of a solitaire game. And again, almost a game where I don't know exactly the mechanic you do, but something where you would have to play through certain missions, and probably card-based. I'm thinking maybe something like Resist by David Thompson, where, you know, you're going on specific missions. Here, it would kind of be the same thing where you collect cards and use cards to go on specific missions. Maybe some kind of a solitaire deck builder, I don't know. But you go on these missions, and you're just trying to, again, come up smelling like roses. And again, the missions would be based on the various books. But I think that would be fantastic fun. Flashman by George MacDonald Fraser, that is my number 5. My number 4 is a series of books that came out not too long ago. And I have to tell you, I've always enjoyed reading science fiction, but I'm not nearly as big a fantasy fan. I read the Game of Thrones books, and I've always enjoyed the Game of Thrones books. And there's a few other here and there I've liked, but generally speaking, I always much preferred science fiction to fantasy. But this is a fantasy series that is unlike any fantasy series I've ever read, and part of it was because it's not set like in castles and in medieval times. Rather, it's set kind of in roughly French Revolutionary Enlightenment times. But of course, it's a completely unique world. But this is Brian McClellan's The Powder Mage trilogy. I'm not going to get too much into the books, but essentially your protagonists are powder mages who are riflemen, but they have some kind of psychic telekinetic power with gunpowder. So when they shoot, they can essentially guide their bullets to their targets. And of course, rival kingdoms need to create special kinds of monsters to specifically hunt down these guys because they're so good. And then of course you have these, what they call the privileged, who are almost like gods because they have so much power. And it's really, really a fantastic. He wrote the original trilogy, and then he wrote a sequel trilogy. And I see this as being, there within the books, without giving too much of away, there is a massive war that takes place. And I could see this as a total, straight-up war game, but you would have asymmetrical powers and asymmetrical units with, of course, the privilege and the wardens, who are the monsters that are created to go after the powder mages, and the mages themselves. See that as a total war game, but maybe you could incorporate story elements, again, like War of the Ring did. I think that would work very, very well. So that is number 4, the Powder Mage trilogies by Brian McClellan. My number 3 is a book series that I read, I think just before I left for Texas, I read the first one, and I just read the last one, I think earlier this year. I finished the series. And there's only like 6 books in the series. And some are better than others. The first book is the best, far and away the best. Some of the others are pretty good too. Some of them are just okay. It's a science fiction series, and this is John Scalzi's Old Man's War series. Essentially, the conceit of the book is there's a war going on in outer space. The people on Earth are ignorant of it, except for kind of the what they call the colonial union, which is out in space, but the people that are still on Earth are ignorant. So the colonial union uses people on Earth as essentially draftees to colonize other worlds, but they also need cannon fodder. So what they do is they tell old people on Earth, if you're willing to come with us, we'll essentially give you a new, young, healthy body in a cloned, healthy, young body. But the catch is you got to go fight in this war. So again, I see this as probably some kind of a war game. And again, incorporating elements of a War of the Ring or Star Wars Rebellion system, where you have military units going off and fighting, but there are conspiracies, and maybe you're trying to, even as you're fighting the enemy, you're trying to get conspiracies. I see it probably as a cooperative game, however. Instead of a war game against an opponent, the opponent will be largely AI, and you're fighting two fronts. You're fighting against the enemies, all these various enemies, and discovering who these new enemies are on the battlefields of these planets, but you're also worrying about what is the Colonial Union up to, what are these guys behind me doing. So I think that could be a very fun game there as well. So this is Old Man's War. That's from John Scalzi. That's my number 3. My number 2 is a book that I read 20 years ago, and I really enjoyed it. And there's other books on that theme that maybe I enjoy a little bit more, but I think this one would probably translate the best to a game. And I must admit that my kind of ideas about the game have been somewhat colored by the TV series that was created a few years ago based on this book. And this is Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick. Now, the basic idea of Man in the High Castle is in 1962, you're in a world where the Nazis and the Japanese won World War II. So essentially, the Nazis control half of North America, the Japanese control half of North America, and right in the Rocky Mountains, there's kind of a neutral zone. In the book, is war coming? Is Nazi Germany and Japan, are they going to go to war against each other? And that's kind of reflected in the series. But I see this actually as kind of a 3-player game. And the idea would be you'd have one faction playing the Nazis, one playing the Imperial Japanese, and one player playing the Resistance. I see it as an asymmetrical game where you would each of these players would have their own objectives, and they would be trying to accomplish their objectives, meaning running secret agents behind enemy lines. And again, you would have to be able to it'd be kind of a war of brinksmanship. So there would be elements of kind of diplomacy, maybe simultaneous actions, but there would also be kind of, again, was this going to evolve into a war? And you might have a limited war, like maybe I can invade this sector and get away with it, this part of North America and get away with it. But at the same time, nobody wants to trigger a nuclear war, which is always the great fear in the book. You don't want to trigger a nuclear war, but it may happen. And maybe under the right circumstances, you could still win with a nuclear war. Again, I don't know, just brainstorming here, but that's my thoughts for Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick. That is my number 2. Now, my number 1 game, or my number one book rather, that I would like to see made into a game, and this is something I've mentioned on the channel before. Now, just like I said with Man in the High Castle, I based it on the book, but it's kind of influenced by the TV series. When I talk about this next one, it is entirely on the book. It's not based on the TV series, which was total garbage. Do not watch this TV series under any circumstances. Read the books. I am referring to Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. Isaac Asimov Foundation series. This series, I read every one of these books when I was in high school, and I fell in love with them. I just had so much fun with them. It's a story of a galactic empire that is about to fall, and it does fall. But right before it falls, a scientist is able to mathematically predict the future. So he predicts how it's going to fall, and he also predicts a way to make sure that the chaos that ensues, instead of being the 30,000 years of chaos that he's predicting, he finds a way to manipulate these factors to create a second empire in just 1,000 years, so that he will create a better and more stable empire and limit the time of chaos. I see this as a game having elements of Battlestar Galactica and diplomacy, meaning you have various different factions from the book, right? Different star systems that are under different political entities. And again, I don't want to give too much away about the book here, because there would be some spoilers if I talk about everything I wanted to do. But there would be one kind of secret society that would be manipulating things. And you wouldn't know who it was. There's a hidden traitor mechanic there. And everybody's trying to manipulate it, and maybe, they're trying to unmask who that hidden traitor is, who that secret society is. But in the meantime, you're having wars and negotiations with your neighbors, so it almost plays too kind of like a TI-4 kind of, space epic game, but it's got this kind of hidden traitor mechanic in there as well. So that's kind of my thoughts on what I would make a Foundation game based on. So that is number one, that's Foundation, that's from Isaac Asimov. Well, ladies and gentlemen, those are some thoughts I had about books that I think would make great games. I'd be very interested to know what you think of my list. Do you think some of these things would work? Or maybe you could get more into the weeds about mechanics about how some of these things would work. And then critically, what books have you read that you think would make great games that haven't had the treatment already? Also, too, have any of my list been games and I just missed it? I'd be interested to know that as well. So please go ahead, please comment on this video on YouTube, Board Game Geek, Facebook, wherever we post it. And please go ahead and subscribe to us on YouTube, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. We're very happy to have you do that. Also, I'd ask you to check out my other channel, that is Cody Carlson, PhD, where we talk about military history and books on history and fun things like that. I'm currently posting some of my lectures on there, so you can check that out. So please go to Cody Carlson, PhD, and subscribe to that channel. And if go ahead and I post this on Board Game Geek, please give a thumb to this video as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I tell a lot of jokes on the channel, and it's funny because I often get people ask me why I don't do more political humor, why I don't tell more political jokes. And the scary thing about political jokes is sometimes they get elected. Please somebody help me on my feet again, and I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know where I've been. Please somebody help me on the solid ground. It's a long time, and I'll be dying. Once a year I wind up in the band. God knows that I love to fight, but I don't ever win. It's a fine line to damnation, but God let me in.
Not only has the discriminating gamer fundamentally transformed the landscape of board game review sites as we know it, but it has fundamentally transformed my life.